All right, welcome. That's a quick demonstration of some of the ideas we're going to get at today. Now, this is a continuation and an expansion of a lesson that I released a couple weeks ago. So I'll include the link below, and if you haven't checked that one out yet, you might want to back up and start there because we're going to take what we talked about in that lesson and expand on it. So we're going to move a little faster through some of the basic concepts, and I don't want you to get lost if you haven't already checked that one out. That said, what are we looking at today? Well, we're taking the concept of using groupings within a scale to create fills on the bass. In this video, we're first going to look at some basic, more technical exercises for how to break a scale into groups and how to get that under your fingers and develop some dexterity with that idea. And then we're going to look at a number of different ways to apply that in a variety of genres using a selection of different subdivisions. So let's go ahead and get started here. A quick review of our basic concept. You can take any scale, whether it's a 7-note scale like major or minor, a pentatonic scale, a different size scale like whole tone. You can take any scale and you can break it into groups of specific sizes like 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes. In our previous video, we looked at groups of 3. Today, we'll look at groups of 4. I think this is easiest demonstrated simply by hearing it. So let me just play for you. I'm going to use a D-flat Mixolydian scale for today's video, implying, of course, a D-flat dominant 7 chord. Here's what it sounds like broken into groups of 3. I think you hear it. I played the scale in groups of 3 notes at a time. Here it is as groups of 4. You can do this descending like I just did, or you can ascend. You can do this with any scale anywhere on the neck. Let's walk through that a little more slowly. I've started on a root, an octave up. Again, here's our key. I'm on the root. And I simply descend 4 notes. 1, 7, 6, 5. Now I play another group of 4, but I start this time on the 7th scale degree. 7, 6, 5, 4. Now I'll start on the 6th scale degree, 5th scale degree, 4th, and there we go. Now you can take this through multiple octaves. You don't have to stop when you get to the root. This gets us to our first exercise. With groups of 4, a lot of options open up, and that's going to become very clear as you watch through this video. But to keep this a manageable amount of information, where we're being thorough, but we're not exploring every possible mathematical permutation, which would take literally hours just in this video, this is a good way to kind of balance those two things. Let's stay in one position. For this video, again, in the key of D-flat Mixolydian, I'm going to hang out here, the 4th, 5th, 6th fret, and maybe plus or minus 1 on either side. So the rule I like to give myself for this first exercise is I can't shift up, I can't shift down, I have to stay in one position. But within one position, I'm going to start on the highest note I have access to without shifting, and I'm going to go down to the lowest note I have access to without shifting. In this case, that's the upper root, D flat, and the lower 5th, A flat. And I'm simply going to go descending and ascending, groups of 4. Now, let me just clarify there. Initially, all of the groups are going to be descending melodies. And I'm going to play that going down, and then I'm going to ascend with ascending melodies. Oops. Let's just hear that really quick with the metronome. And for context, I'm doing this at 97 beats per minute. So here's our first simplest exercise. Groups of 4 descending and ascending without pausing. Now, you can do this in any key, in any position. I could even stay in D flat and do this all over the neck, but for now I'll just show you that one position. And of course you can start ascending and then descend as well if you prefer that. Now, a lot of mathematical options open up, like I said before. People get real into all kinds of different permutations when it comes to these groups within a scale thing. You could mirror that. You could play down the scale, but have your groups of 4 ascend, or vice versa. You could ascend the scale with descending melodies. You could mix and match. So a lot of stuff opens up. We're not going to get into every single permutation today, but suffice it to say, on your own, you can start to try a lot of combinations. So we've got this first exercise. Now, what if we added a little pause between every group of 4? How would that sound? What if we paused for an 8th note to leave a little bit of space when we're resetting each time? Let me just show you what that would sound like. Nice, sounds a little bit different. Both of those are good to practice. The first version where there's a steady stream of notes without pausing, and the second version where we leave a little breath between each group. In real musical situations, both of those get used all the time, so let's start practicing both. Now I'm going to put one more option on the table. When we did this with groups of 3 in the last video, this particular way of sequencing it, there's really only one way to do it, etc., etc. But with groups of 4, yes, we have the version I've shown you so far, which is kind of like taking what we did in the last video and simply applying it to groups of 4, but we also get a different way of doing this. If we call what I've just shown you path A, I descend from the 1, I descend from the 7, I descend from the 6, from the 5. If that's path A, there's also a path B, and it would be this. What's going on there? Sounds very, very slightly different, but it's an important difference. Here's what it is. I start the same way, 1, 7, 6, 5. But now I'm ending on the 5th, and rather than start the next group back up at the 7th, I can just go one note up and start it on the 6th. 6, 5, 4, 3, I've ended on the 3rd. So in path B, rather than jump up to the 5th now, I just go one note up to the 4th. I've ended on the root, so I'll start the next one on the 2nd. Sounds just slightly different, but it's an important difference. Some melodies will use path A, some melodies will use path B, so we want to be able to execute and recognize both of those. And of course, the same thing works when we're ascending. 5, 6, 7, 1, I've ended on the root, so I'm going to start the next one just one note below on the 7th. I've ended on the 3rd, I'll start one note below on the 2nd. I've ended on the 5th, I'll start on the 4th. I've ended on the 7th, I'll start on the 6th. And we'll kind of resolve it there. Both path A and path B are important to practice. Now, already, you see what I mean. We've got path A and path B. We've got ascending and descending. We've got leaving a space between groups versus not leaving a space. We're starting to have a lot of options, probably an overwhelming number of options. So for this video, I'm going to focus on showing you how to create fills using path A. We'll use some with space and some without space, but know that you've got this whole other set of options to explore, this whole other set of vocabulary in the form of path B. Let's get into how we might apply this in a musical setting. So just like we did in the last video, we're going to make this more musical by using less of it. It's kind of like seasoning food. If we have measure after measure where we're simply going, it's going to start to just sound like a mechanical exercise. It won't be very musical. Just like if we dumped a ton of seasoning on a piece of food. We're going to make this more artful by using just a little bit of it. Let's take 2 groups of 4 notes. Just that much. I'm starting on the root and then starting on the 7th. That's it. Let's start slow. Let's think of this as 8th notes. We'll play a groove. We'll do just our root note, maybe quarter notes, and we'll do a measure of quarter notes on the root, and then an 8th note version of that fill. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 7 6 5 7 6 5 4. Here we go. Let's hear it with a drum beat. Okay. Sounds all right. Now, because it's so slow, it probably doesn't feel like a fill because we're used to fills being a little bit faster, a little bit more attention grabbing. When it's as slow as that, it maybe doesn't feel the way we think of a bass fill as being. You might think of it when it's 8th notes almost more like a unison line, like maybe there's a horn section playing that figure and you're playing it with them. Maybe that's more of the context where we would use that kind of thing at that speed. Now, here's a quick note. This is a larger concept when it comes to melodies and fills and improvisation and composition as well, actually. Do you notice anything about the way that phrase ends? Here's our key. And we end on this note. The sentence feels unfinished, doesn't it? And here's why. We're ending on a non-chord tone. Let me back up and explain this in case this is new for any of you. We're playing in the key of D flat, dominant 7. Any chord we're playing over is going to have a root, a 3rd, a 5th, and maybe a 7th. Generally, melodies sound more resolved when they end or land on a chord tone, whether that's the root, 3rd, 5th, or 7th, or maybe there's other chord tones. When melodies end on a non-chord tone, they tend to feel unresolved, and sometimes that's a good thing. But when you're first trying to learn how to improvise and play fills, you probably want to err on the side of a resolution. You kind of want to know how to resolve and then choose not to, rather than only knowing how to play in a way that doesn't resolve. Now, ending a phrase on the 1 is going to sound really resolved, like the end of a paragraph, whereas ending on the 3rd, 5th, or the 7th is going to be more like the end of a sentence. Listen to the difference. Here's our key. I'll end on a non-chord tone. Now I'll end on a chord tone. Or a different chord tone. most resolved of all. It's kind of the difference between taking the plane up in the air and you go on a journey and then the plane lands versus taking the plane up in the air, you're on a journey and then you just stop and that's the end of the story. It's not a very satisfying story if we just end. So all this to say, what do you do if you're practicing something like this or you're improvising and you've got 2 groups of 4 and it happens to end on a non-chord tone? Well, there's a couple easy solutions. First of all, you can just add 1 more note. In a 7-note scale, you're never more than 1 scale degree away from a chord tone. So you just go 1 note lower, you're on the 3rd, or 1 note higher, you're on the 5th. In order to make that fit rhythmically, you will have to speed up 2 of your notes. That could sound like this. Again, it's probably not the coolest fill you've ever heard because it's relatively slow and we're taking a simple piece of vocab. It's going to feel more exciting when we speed it up. But you get the idea that sounds a little more resolved, especially if we're ending on that fill and just kind of hanging there. So all that to say, you can end a fill on a non-chord tone, but you want to maybe start off by practicing aiming for a chord tone. It's going to help you to avoid, as you're learning to improvise, accidentally hitting notes that sound really off and having everybody in the band kind of look at you funny. There's another way you could get around this. Rather than starting on the root, where we end on the 4th, you could start on the 7th. Now we naturally end on the 3rd. Let's hear what that would sound like in context. Okay, that works too, right? You can actually experiment with this 2 groups of 4 starting on every single note in the scale. And again, in any scale. So this is where we get into that whole lots of options thing. Let's go ahead and let's talk about what can we do when we're comfortable with 8th notes and we want to now speed this up a bit. Well, one of the easy ways to do that is to simply speed up the subdivision. So instead of 8th notes, what if we did this as triplets? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and becomes 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. We're increasing how many notes happen each measure, so it's going to sound a little faster. Now, in order to make this fit, you might consider doing 3 groups of 4 instead of 2, because that's going to line up really nicely over a single measure. Let me just show you what that would sound like. Same concept, quarter notes on the root, and then a measure where we play 3 groups of 4. And look at that, we happen to end on the 3rd. We end on a chord tone. Let's hear it in context. Okay, nice. That probably starts to feel a little more like you expect a fill to feel, doesn't it? Simply because we're playing faster. The fact that it's triplets, depending on what the basic groove is in that song, also might kind of provide more of a juxtaposition. If it's an 8th note based groove and you go to triplets, that can really be kind of attention grabbing in a cool way. Now remember, all the same stuff applies. You can ascend as well. by the way, the first time I did that one, I actually technically messed it up. I skipped one of the notes when I was doing a group, and you'll probably notice it doesn't really matter. That's the cool thing about this, is if you accidentally skip a note, it's just going to sound like an intentional melodic choice. Now, we want to practice this to the point where hopefully we can avoid that happening, because we want to be in control of the sound that we're making. But when you're playing and something happens and there's a slip up, this is pretty forgiving. And that's why guitarists and soloists rely on groupings like this so much, because there's a lot of flexibility. And if you miss your footing somewhere within a longer phrase, nobody's really going to notice. It might even sound cool that way. So we can take this as triplets. Now, at this point, let's remember that we don't have to just do this with our simple quarter note groove. We can do this with really any kind of groove, any style of music. So we could do something like this. Yeah, okay. Totally works, right? From here, once you're comfortable with that, you can step it up again into 16th notes, a little bit faster still. Now, when you get into 16th notes, yes, you can just play it the way we have been. This is what we called path A at the start of the video, and we're playing all the notes in a steady stream without pausing. And you can do that for 16th notes. And that's cool. Certainly it's fast, right? But it can start to also sound maybe a little bit stiff, or maybe you like it. But either way, you can get a lot of mileage with 16th notes out of adding some space in, because otherwise it kind of just turns into blah, 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 like nonstop. So this is a place to get back to. At the beginning of the video, we showed leaving space between every group before. It comes in handy with 16th notes. It both sounds interesting, and it also can be a little more forgiving technically. Let's do like 2, 3, 4. So still 3 groups of 4 notes. We're leaving a little space between them so that it fits into one measure as 16th notes. And if we play that with a groove, okay, very nice. You're going to get so many options, because when we get into 16th notes, it takes more notes to fill the measure. And that means there's more room to combine different variations, different length pauses, or different combinations of groups. You can even get into mixing and matching groups of 4, which we looked at today, and groups of 3, which we did in the last video. And that starts to get really interesting and really challenging too. Spend your time with this. There's months and months, if not years, of stuff you can dig into within these concepts. And remember, we've got path A and path B. We've got groups of 4 without space between them and groups of 4 with space between them. We've got descending and ascending. So there's a lot of options. So thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments what you come across, what you come up with, where you run into challenges. That way we can all learn from each other. And of course, if you want to dig into this stuff in more detail, reach out to me about doing like a one-on-one or something like that. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.